Welcome to episode 2 of our mini series, How to Buy Property in the United States as a Foreigner. This is episode number 2. My name's David Garner. Over the past 9 years, I've bought over 100 rental properties in the US for my own portfolio. And today, my team and I help other non-resident foreigners from all over the world navigate the US real estate market and build profitable property portfolios. Now, in episode 1 of this series, we talked about some of the real fundamentals: who can own property in the US, what restrictions there are, and what you need to have in place before you go out looking for a property. So if you missed that, you'll find it on our channel. You can go back, you can subscribe to the channel so you get to see all the videos in this series. Because in this series, we're going to show you everything you need to know about buying property in the US as a foreigner safely from overseas. So with that said, episode number 2. Today, we're going to talk about the purchase process that we go through as foreigners when we're buying property in the US. And this is a little different to the purchase process that you would go through if you're a US citizen looking to buy your own home. The steps are a little bit jumbled up because we're not present in the country. We might be looking at multiple markets, and the loan product that we use, the mortgage that we use, is different. So the order in which we do things is a little different. But today we're going to cover that purchase process. And don't worry if you don't find enough detail in this video, because all of the steps in this purchase process we're going to run as a deep dive in further episodes in the mini series. But for today, let's talk about the purchase process. So for us, the purchase process starts with setting up your investment structure. I never recommend you buy property in the US in your own name. That can be very dangerous from a liability perspective, and it can also limit your options when it comes to filing US taxes. So we want to set up an LLC. We want to set up the right kind of LLC in the right jurisdiction with the right paperwork. And that LLC, that limited liability company, which is a legal US entity, is going to own the property. So once we've got that set up, we can set up a US bank account. We can get our tax identifier numbers, which is something I talked about in episode 1. So we've got everything in place to go out and buy a property. So once we've set our investment structure up, what we're then going to do, step number 2, we're going to start researching markets. We want to buy property in neighborhoods where property values are rising, where rent price growth is positive, so we get more rent each year. We want to buy neighborhoods where the fundamental demographics and socioeconomics indicate that property values are going to continue to rise long into the future. So we do a real deep dive on market research. So we're looking for good quality rental markets with high demand for rentals, low vacancy rates, good capital growth, rent price growth, and all of those things that go into that. And we're going to cover that in much more detail in a future episode of the series. Once we've found the right market to invest in, the next step is searching for properties. And this is the fun bit, going out and trying to find properties to buy. And there are lots of sources for you. You can search on Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, Realtor. You can start contacting local real estate agents, or you can work with a company like us who sources properties specifically for foreigners who want to own real estate in the US. Once we've found a property, we analyze that property, we analyze the cash flow, we put in all of our operating costs. We want to make sure there's enough income from that property to cover all of our operating costs and our debt service, which is our mortgage payment. So we're going to have positive cash flow at the end of each month, at the end of each year. Again, we're going to do a deep dive onto that cash flow analysis and that purchase analysis in a future episode of the series. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Once we found a property in the right market, and it fits our investment model, we know that's going to generate enough rents, and we know the costs are reasonable, we can make an offer. Now, if we make an offer and it's accepted, we're going to sign a purchase contract and we're going to pay an earnest money deposit. An earnest money deposit is usually a small amount of money. It's around about $1,000, and it shows willing from the buyer and commitment. So we'll appoint an attorney to represent us in the sale, we'll sign a purchase contract, and we'll pay our earnest money deposit. But within the purchase contract, we will have a due diligence period. And that allows us to conduct our final due diligence before we purchase the property, to make sure we're not buying ourselves a problem, there's not problems with the property, and to make sure that we're not overpaying as well, because we're going to get a home inspection and we're going to get an independent appraisal to make sure that the value, the price that we're paying for the property, is in line with the value. So for us foreigners, it's at this point that we'll introduce our mortgage lender. So for US citizens, speaking to a mortgage lender is the very, very first thing that you do in the process, because that lender is going to lend to you. They're very borrower centric. But as a foreigner, we're going to use a different type of loan product, and they're going to look at the property rather than the borrower. So before we even speak to a mortgage lender, we need to have gone through those first few steps and have a property that we have under contract that we want to buy, so we can submit that to our lender for funding. And our lender's going to take 2 to 4 business days, and they're going to come back to us with a pre-approval. So now you've signed a contract, you've appointed an attorney, you've paid your earnest money deposit, and you've got a pre-approval from your lender, and you can move on to those extra stages of due diligence, which is getting your home inspection. You have an independent home inspector go out and look at the property, make sure there are no defects, make sure there are no major structural problems. I also recommend you get a roof inspection and a sewer scope as well. These are things that I've missed in the past that have cost me tens of thousands of dollars. So we make sure we do that with every property that we buy to make sure that we're not buying ourselves a problem, and we get that independent appraisal. But if we're using a mortgage lender, it's the mortgage lender that will get that appraisal, because they want to make sure they're not going to lend you too much money based on the property value. So they want to know what it's worth. And those are both really crucial, important things. Now, if there are problems with the home inspection, that gives us an opportunity to go back to the seller and say, hey, you need to fix these problems, or you need to give us a discount on the purchase price to reflect the fact that we're going to have to repair this property to make the repairs that the home inspector has picked up. So if we get a good home inspection, we get a good appraisal, we'll then need to buy a home insurance policy. We'll need to get a title report, which is something that your attorney will do for you, and we can move forward into the closing process. And the closing process, we're going to do an entire episode on that, because it's a little bit different for foreigners when we're buying property, because normally you would have to attend the closing to sign your loan paperwork and sign the deeds in front of a US notary. But we can't do that if we're from overseas. So we have a special closing process that allows us to close remotely. And again, we're going to talk about that in much more detail in a future episode. We're going to dedicate an entire episode to the closing process for foreigners. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But once we've closed on the property, we then are going to assign a property manager to manage that property for us. Now, I only buy fully renovated properties, preferably with a tenant already in place. So the properties that I buy usually already have a property manager assigned. But if you're buying a vacant property, or you're buying a property that needs renovation work, which again, I don't recommend if you're from overseas, but if that's what you're going to do, then you'll need to renovate that property. You need to find a contractor and do the work and manage that work from overseas, which can be very difficult. Don't recommend it. And you're going to need to find a property manager. And again, there's going to be a whole future episode specifically about sourcing a property manager and how to run your due diligence on that manager to make sure you get a good one. And then you're going to move on to filing your US taxes. Every year, you're going to have to file taxes in the US to report your US sourced income, your rental income. And that can be quite a complex subject. That's going to be the very last episode that we run in this mini series. So make sure you stay tuned to that. But that is the purchase process for overseas foreigners who want to buy property. It starts with market research. Then we find a property. Then we make an offer. Then we get a pre-approval for our mortgage. Then we do our due diligence. Then we close. And then we're into the asset management phase, where we assign a property manager and we manage our tax liability in the US. So stay tuned for the next episode, where we're going to take a deep dive into setting up your investment structure, how to set up an LLC, how to open a US bank account, but also what kind of LLC to set up, where should we set it up, and all of those other questions that are really, really important to get right to make sure that you don't have liability or tax issues later on down the line. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And if you want to learn more about investing in real estate as a foreigner, I've got a free guide. It's called the 10 most expensive mistakes that foreigners make when they're buying real estate in the US. It's free, it's actionable, and you can download it using the link in the description to this video. So I'll see you in the next episode.